Greetings, dear friends, fellow programmers, and those aspiring to be. I have a question for you. Have you ever felt like your code looks like this? A tangled mess that's very hard to understand and even harder to maintain and extend. Today, we are going to get started on a journey of improving our code and making it way better and worthy of the name fine piece of code. So we're getting started from a very tangled situation. You will see what I'm talking about very shortly. And we will start by reducing nesting in that code in this video and try to make it a bit easier to understand, follow, maintain, and generally be in a relationship with this code. Deeply nested code, the same way as deeply nested thoughts, can be very difficult to follow and understand. So here are the reasons why nested code is bad. The first issue is going to be readability. When you have very nested code that goes many levels in depth, you and everybody else who takes a look in this code will have a very difficult time reading and understanding what the code does. The second point is going to be maintainability. When you have very nested code, it's probably almost impossible to maintain it, extend it, update it in any way, shape or form without breaking everything in the process. Because when it's hard to understand something, it's also probably difficult to change it without breaking stuff. So that is exactly why you should avoid nested code as well. Third point is going to be debugging. When it comes to debugging, you are in for a hellish experience if you are supposed to debug nested code, because it will be so difficult, on a level of a nightmare difficult, to follow along what's exactly happening in this code when it is nested heavily. And the final point are going to be relationships. Yep, you've heard it right. I'm talking about your relationship with your colleagues or people who will see your code and basically stop talking to you and stop being your friend probably. Because me personally, when I see code that looks like a nested, tangled mess, I'm usually very pissed off. And to be honest, I do not like being that person in someone else's eyes. So I highly recommend you to avoid nesting your code so that people will like you more. And on the other side of the coin, we have flat code. I'm talking about code that has maybe 1 or 2 levels of nesting at most. Whenever you have more than a single nesting in your code, you probably should reconsider and try to reorganize the code so that it is flatter than it currently is. But now let's talk about advantages of flat code. By reducing nesting in our code, we implement the following. First, clarity. The code is going to be way easier to understand both for you or anybody out there who takes a glance at the code. Second point, maintainability. We're back again to this point. When you can understand the code, it's much easier to adjust it, maintain it, update it, do whatever you like with it, because it will be easier to achieve that with flat code. Then again we have debugging, because it's basically just the reverse situation from the previous scenario. It will be much easier to debug the code when it's flat. You just go one at a time line and you will be able to understand everything that is going on. And then we have collaboration. Other people that you might be working with as a part of a team will like you a lot better when they do not have to spend hours trying to understand what you wanted to achieve in your code. When it is flat, people will be able to understand it way easier. So that's a nice thing to have. And finally, you will have lack of hate from other developers. As we already spoke about, people will probably hate you less than they would if you were writing nested code. so they will not be pissed off at you as much. And now, if you are still not sold on the idea of flat code, let us jump to Visual Studio and see a simple example that I have in store for you. And now, for all of you brave people who did not run away from your monitors screaming when you saw this masterpiece of code, I would like to congratulate you for bravery first, and then we can get started and start discussing what needs to be done with this code to make it usable, basically. Before we begin and start untangling this code, let me copy it into another method so that we can go back to the initial state and compare them in the end of the video. What we have here is the situation that is not so shiny. What we are going to do first is figure out that we have check that checks whether data is not null, and if it is not null, then this stuff is going to be executed. And this can be extracted as check that will return early if the data is null. This is also a concept that is very commonly and very widely accepted in the programming language, and it is called just like that, returning early, and you want to use it whenever you can. This basically means that we will perform a check whether data is equal to none, and we can use syntactic sugar and using is keyword, and if data is null, we will just return in that case. And if we are here, that means that data is not null and we can proceed. But now what we can do to improve the code even further. When it comes to the for loop, we cannot unnest it, we need it. So we can proceed to the next line. Here we have a check whether data of I is greater than 0. And if it is, then we are proceeding into this for statement. But as we did initially, we can again check if data is less than or equal to 0 and continue in that case. So basically what we are doing here is again returning early. In this case, just not returning, but basically iterating into the next step of our for loop. Because it makes no sense to continue executing in this particular algorithm when data of I is not greater than 0. So after we have done that, we are again left with a for loop that we cannot evade, at least for now. And after that, we have another check where we are checking whether data at the index of j modulus 2 is equal to 0. I'll explain what this means a bit later, but for now we can see that we have two if statements chained one to another. And what we can do in situations like this is we can join these two conditions and proceed only when both are basically complying. And let's do that. Again, we are going to pull out the core logic that is inside of the if statements, but now we need to negate these two conditions in order to keep the logic the same. Because before, if you think about it, we wanted to execute this code when these conditions were met. But now we want to break early when these conditions are not met. So we will do the following. We will just negate the conditions. So basically when I is equal to j, or not and anymore. We are inverting the condition here. So we are not using and operator, we are using or operator. Or when data of j modulus 2 is not equal to null, we will continue. And if that was not the case, then we will again execute this part because that's what we want to do. So what this line right here means is we have data of j, so data at index of j, modulus 2 is not equal to 0. So this basically means that we are checking data array of integers and we're checking at the index of j whether the number when divided by 2 has no remainder of division. Modulus basically gives you return while dividing two numbers. So when we divide this number by 2 and we receive 0 as a result, that means that this number is even. It's not odd, it's even. And when it is odd, we just want to continue. And finally, we are left with while loop, which we cannot untangle anymore. So basically, this is the final version of our flattened code that we had in the beginning. But when you take a look, it does seem a lot more readable than it did in the beginning. I hope you agree with me here. So, what do you think? Which one is more readable and understandable to you? The first one or the second one? And if you said the first one, yeah, please leave this channel and never come back. Yeah, because I have nothing to teach you. And for the rest of you people who said that the second version is easier to understand, I hope you had fun. What else can I say? I hope you enjoyed this video, and I would like to kindly invite you to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, because that way you will not miss the next uploads. Until the next video, thank you for watching and have an amazing day. Happy coding!